Hey everyone.
Hey guys.
Welcome to another Travel Therapy Mentor video. Tonight we're going to be talking about our new PRN jobs that we took. We actually decided to take a little bit of time from traveling. We're going to talk about the various reasons why we decided to go PRN instead of taking travel contracts, and just some considerations when looking for PRN jobs, because there's a lot of travelers right now that are in a similar situation to us that are choosing to take PRN instead of travel contracts just because the market is still at least 50% less than it was prior to COVID. So Whitney's going to introduce us, and then we'll jump into talking about our new PRN jobs.
All right. Hey everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. My name is Whitney Aiken.
And I'm Jared Kazaza.
And we are both traveling doctors of physical therapy. As Jared mentioned, we are normally traveling doctors of physical therapy, but right now we are actually hanging out at home in Roanoke, Virginia, and we're taking PRN jobs temporarily. It doesn't mean that we're settling down for good. We still plan to travel in the future, but tonight we're going to talk a little bit about kind of that decision-making process, why this was a good time for us right now in the current situation to take PRN jobs. And we want to talk about that decision-making process for a lot of other people who have been thinking about taking a PRN or a perm job instead of a travel job, and then a lot of those that already have done so over the past several months with COVID going on. So Jared is going to share a video in a few groups so that more people can join on with us live tonight. If any of you guys are tuning in live with us, we'd love if you would comment below and just tell us who you are. Say hi. Say if you're a PT, an OT, an SLP, an assistant. Tell us if you are currently working travel or you're, maybe unemployed, kind of in limbo right now. If you are working PRN or perm, we'd love to hear from you. And we'd also love if you guys would ask some questions, because we wrote down a lot of stuff that we want to go over tonight as far as what we feel like is important for you guys to know about this option. But earlier today when I made a post about this, a few questions came up that we maybe hadn't thought to address. So if you have any additional questions or concerns, if you were thinking about taking this route, please feel free to ask us questions in the comments and we will answer them towards the end of the video. I see that quite a few of you guys are on live. Thank you for joining us. Hi Nick, hi Rayon, hi Hannah, hi Jessica, hi Bob, hi Armand, hi Allie, hi Andrea. Thank you guys for joining. And if any of you guys are watching later on the replay, you can feel free to type team replay in the comments. And I know that some of you guys listen later on our podcast and our YouTube channel. So thank you guys also for listening later on the replay. Hi Nikki. Hi Kristen. So Nick says, hello, I'm on contract until March. I know that Nick is a travel PT. He's on contract until March in an outpatient in Roswell, New Mexico. Hopefully I'll get to extend. That would be great, Nick. That's one thing we're going to talk about right now is the outpatient travel therapy market. So if you can hang on to that outpatient travel job, then definitely do. Nikki says, I'm an SLP. I was working in travel up until February and I've been home ever since. Nikki, are you working a job at home or are you just not working at the moment? Let us know. Hi Justin, hi Jordan. Thank you guys for joining. So just to give you guys some background, we'll talk a little bit about kind of how 2020 has been going for us. Many of you guys who follow our page and have watched our videos before might be well aware of our situation, but I finished my last job, my last travel contract in February, and then Jared didn't work that contract, so he wasn't working at that time, but I finished up my last travel job in February before COVID hit, and we were planning on taking off an extended time at that time to go on a trip to South and Central America. And then around March is when all the COVID stuff hit and we had to cancel our trip. So at that time, it kind of put us in limbo, and a lot of people lost their jobs at that time. Perm therapists, travel therapists lost their jobs in March. And many of you guys watching or listening might have also been in that camp where you lost your jobs. So for a little while, we just kind of were frozen the way that everybody else was. I mean, there was no jobs to be had, so we weren't worried about working. We were just going to wait and see what happened. So kind of around May, we figured, well, the job market's not really that good right now for travel. We're going to probably just stay around as things were evolving with COVID in our hometown. So we decided to stay around at least for the summer. And so at that time, we had actually thought about taking PRN jobs then. So at that time is when we actually sort of started the process of considering PRN jobs. And at that time, we put out some feelers. And so the route that we went is we just used previous connections that we'd already had. We didn't really want to go into an inpatient setting at that time because of everything with COVID. We're most comfortable in outpatient anyway. So we put out some feelers with the outpatient folks that we know. We have some friends in the area that work at certain outpatient companies. We sort of asked around to see if anybody needed any help. And then we also asked at a company that we had worked for before as travelers in different cities, not in our hometown. We reached out to the manager at that time and asked if they needed any help. And unfortunately, at that time, nobody really needed help. Caseloads were still very low for most settings, and a lot of people were having trouble even staffing their full-time staff back in May. A lot of their full-time staff was still furloughed. So at that time, they were like, no, we don't really need any help. But the manager that we'd reached out to that we knew from a job where we had worked with them at another location said, you know what, I'll hang on to your information and I'll let you know if we need any help. So at that time, we just kind of sat on it for a while, said, okay, I guess right now, May, June wasn't really a good time to work. So then we just switched gears. We were working on our online business stuff, and we figured we'll just hang out for a while, not work. And then we started planning our road trip, and we went on our road trip. So you want to tell them a little about when we got back from our road trip, kind of what we started thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I think for pretty much all travelers, it's a good idea to have a PRN job back home for a variety of reasons. One is because for your tax home, it definitely looks better if you have a job that you return to sometimes. So if you can have a PRN job that knows that you travel and you'll be back in the area sometimes, this is ideal to be able to go back in town and work some hours. One, to make some extra money. Two, to make your tax home extremely solid. It's always a good idea to have that. So we've looked for that in the past, but for a lot of times we're not home enough for it to even really matter. We're not really home enough to work hours for PRN jobs. But now that we've bought a house in our hometown, it made a lot more sense for us to look for PRN, even though we do intend to continue to travel once things settle back down.
Yeah, that's a good point. We had actually thought about this in the past before. We just never had really reached out, and it became more pertinent this year especially. We thought now would probably be a good idea to get our foot in the door. And so when we got back from our road trip, we were sort of in this limbo of trying to decide, okay, are we going to start looking for another travel job, or are we going to just hang around a little bit more since the travel market it hasn't really picked back up yet? So what we decided, we just got back a couple weeks ago, and we decided, you know what, we're going to just put those same feelers out and get a feel for if a PRN job is an option right now. And we pretty much had made up our minds if it was an option that we would hang out at home until the holidays and go ahead and do that PRN job. But if it hadn't been an option, we would have started looking more in depth for travel contracts.
Yeah, and right now for us in particular, some travelers are doing really well, especially the ones that are okay traveling in skilled nursing or home health. Neither of those settings are really something that we want to do. So right now there's almost no outpatient travel jobs. So between taking like a skilled nursing or a home health travel job versus taking a PRN outpatient job at home, it made a lot more sense for us to go PRN. And I think that could be the case for a lot of you guys that want to do outpatient, because there are just so few jobs out there right now. If there's any way to take a high-paying PRN job at home, or even if it's a location a little ways away from home, instead of trying desperately to find an outpatient travel assignment.
Yeah, that's a huge point. The outpatient market has been really hit the hardest, and we have not seen those outpatient travel jobs come back the same way that we have for skilled nursing and home health. And earlier this year, or well, it was the end of last year, beginning of this year, when I took an outpatient contract and Jared didn't work, that was okay for us at that time, but we really weren't in a position where we wanted to do that again this time. Jared needed to kind of get his foot back in the saddle and work a job right now. Whereas right now, a lot of folks that are reaching out to us, especially couples, we're telling them that if you can't find 2 travel jobs right now as a pair, it might be in your best interest to settle and look for just one if you guys can afford to do that. So we had used that option in the past, but at this time, we felt that it was important that we both got started back working because it had been a little while since Jared had worked.
Yeah, so for me, I was nervous because it had been almost a year and a half since I was in the clinic. And I knew that if I wait much longer, then I'm just not going to want to go back. So I wanted to get some clinical experience and just try to remember some of the skills that I had. So I didn't want to wait any longer. I didn't want to go into 2021 and still not having work since the beginning of 2019.
Yeah. So with all that in mind, we decided we were just going to put out those feelers to see if a outpatient PRN job was an option right now, and if it wasn't, we were going to work a little bit harder on looking for those travel jobs. And we're working on like an additional state license right now, so we were definitely considering taking a travel job. But at the same time, we were a little bit leaning towards staying at home because of the holidays coming up. We just felt like it might be a good time to be at home again. So fortunately, when I reached back out, the first location that I reached back out to was the one that we had worked for this company in the past on 2 different travel assignments at their other outpatient locations on the East Coast, not here, but somewhere else. And they actually said yes. They had a change in their staffing needs, and they had kind of an increase in caseload, and they were like, this is really good timing. Actually, we could really use your help.
Yeah.
So much so that we actually really got started, like hit the ground running. Like we thought there might be more of a ramp up time, or maybe they wouldn't need us so much, but they actually had a really big need. So pretty much we reached out, and within a week we were in the clinic helping them out.
Less than a week. And in reality, we really only wanted to do maybe 2 or 3 days a week. And we wanted to, just freshen up our skills, and me especially, to feel a little more comfortable in the clinic and not start with a jam-packed caseload, but it kind of has turned out that we are probably going to be pretty busy. And in some ways that's really good, and in some ways I'm a little nervous about it. So we'll see how it goes.
So what we'll do is we'll just go over some of the logistics of how the situation worked out for us, and then we'll talk to you guys about how, if you're considering doing this, how it might work out for you.
Yep.
So for us, it worked out really well in terms of getting our foot in the door at this particular clinic, because basically the regional manager that staffs all of Virginia and then some of North Carolina, we already knew that person. So connections are key, networking is key. So we didn't even really have to formally fill out an application, send in our resume, none of that. We didn't
have to interview. He already knew who we were. He knew that we'd done a decent job in his other clinics and was ready to just have us come on. So that was really an ideal situation for us.
That was awesome, because I can remember a couple years ago we had talked about maybe at some point in life, and I think we mentioned on a video that at some point in life we might look at getting PRN outpatient jobs. And I can remember a couple years ago one of the other travel therapists saying, do outpatients use PRN staff? And how do you even make that connection? But honestly, like that connection that we had from a travel job was really essential for us, because that was a huge step. They actually didn't have a job advertised. Like there wasn't an advertisement out for a PRN therapist. But because we had that connection and we just reached out to them directly, it worked out great.
Yeah, and that's really, I think, a valuable part of being a traveler, because we have connections all around this area. We've worked 4 or 5 contracts in Virginia and 4 or 5 contracts in North Carolina. So we have tons of connections with a variety of clinics that, same situation where a regional manager might be over other clinics that we might go to in the future. And that makes the whole process of getting into a clinic, get your foot in the door, a lot easier.
Yeah, so definitely recommend that if you have the same opportunity with those types of connections. Otherwise, that other route that we had tried to go, where we reached out to friends or maybe former professors or former CIs, that would have been another step that we would have taken, just so you can find out that inside scoop. And sometimes you can get your foot in the door a lot easier that way. So that's how it worked out for us. It was great because we had experience. We knew the EMR system. We didn't have to do a phone interview. We really didn't have to do much training. And that was actually a really good negotiating point for us, because they knew that we could kind of hit the ground running, especially because we had been travelers in fairly busy clinics with them before. They're actually having us float between a couple of their clinics, and we were able to use that to our advantage in negotiating our rate. And hopefully we'll be able to use it to our advantage if we need to ask for other things along the way, in terms of like which clinics we'd prefer to go to, which hours we'd prefer to work. So those are some good negotiating points, especially when you already have a good relationship.
Yeah, and another very positive thing about the situation that we got into is I didn't have to explain the 1.5 year work gap, because I already knew the manager and we didn't really have to interview. Otherwise, I was a little nervous about what a hiring manager might think about me not being in the clinic for so long, and whether that would be a big deterrent or not. And luckily it was not. And so I think now that I'll be back in the clinic, I don't think future jobs will be as difficult for me to get without you having to explain that whole gap.
Yeah, that's a huge point, because there were a lot of people that asked us when I said that we were going back to work after it had been about 8 months for me and about 1.5 years for Jared. They were wondering about that gap in work history. And I've heard other travelers talk about this before, their concern about going back to a hiring manager after, 3 weeks, a month, 2 months off. So far, we've never had any problems with that. If it was brought up, we would just explain, we're travelers and sometimes we take time off to take trips and that sort of thing. And they usually were pretty impressed by it. Actually, they were like, wow, that sounds cool. I want to do that. So as long as you have a good answer for that in terms of you being a traveler, hopefully it won't be an issue. But for this job, for us, it was not an issue at all. They didn't care at all.
Yep.
So just kind of talking about some of the perks of this situation for us, it really helps us because now we have a foot in the door with this company for future opportunities. So for one thing, even though we let them know that this would maybe only be for a few months, and then probably come January, we were going to reassess and maybe think about looking at travel jobs and leaving the area again. So they were understanding of that, but it helps because now they know we're going to come back into town. Like we have a house here, we have family here. So they know that we could be continuously used at future opportunities when we are in town. And then maybe with the hopes of if we settle down here permanently, we might be interested in taking perm jobs with them or staying on as like a regular part-time, more frequent therapist. So there's a lot of really good benefits there to us making this connection now.
Yeah, so we plan to, even when we take our next contracts or we take our next trip when we're allowed to travel internationally again, we plan to stay hired on with this company and just take a hiatus while we're gone and stay on the PRN roster for when we come back.
Yeah, and I know that we're not the only ones that do this. If anybody's watching and you also do this, please let us know. I know we've talked to other travelers that keep a contract set up, a PRN contract back at home. So that way when they are home for extended periods of time, they sign on to work. And that's a really good thing to have that connection. And one perk that we also talked about was sometimes these PRN jobs will have you do like online modules for training frequently. And every now and then you can actually continue to do those trainings and get paid for a couple hours here and there, just depending on the position. You had one other job that you were able to do that as well.
Yeah, I love those online modules where you can make $50 an hour, basically just doing a training module from home or something like that. And there's a lot of PRN jobs where they want you to stay on top of their training module things, and you can have a situation where even though you're not working for them at the time, say we're on a travel assignment, but for us to stay PRN, we need to keep up with those things. We could be able to clock in remotely and make some extra money, which is pretty cool.
That's a pretty cool perk. So talking about, I know that we're not the only ones right now. We've had a lot of people reach out to us saying that they were looking at travel jobs, or maybe they're normally travelers, or they were thinking about doing traveling, and then ultimately this year, because of the way the job market is, they decided to just take Perm or PRN. So I think we've kind of hammered home, if you've watched any of our recent videos, the fact that the job market has been drastically hit by COVID. Really low number of jobs, really high competition for those jobs, which has caused some people to have to really settle when it comes to settings. Like Jared mentioned, maybe have to settle on taking a skilled nursing and that's not your first choice, or they have to settle on location, or they have to settle on pay. And there were definitely a lot of people that just weren't willing to do that. So for them, it just made more sense to try something else right now. And there were some people that just couldn't get their foot in the door. So we know a lot of new grads that just were not able to find travel jobs. And rather than sit around and wait for months and months and months without work, they were just like, you know what, right now, at this point in my life, it makes more sense to go ahead and sign on to a Perm or a PRN job.
Yeah, and for about the last 6 months, all the new grads that reach out to us, we have a ton of new grads reaching out, asking if traveling's the right thing, or for recruiter recommendations, or those kind of things. We've been telling those people probably not to travel right now. It's not a great time. Even if you can find a travel assignment that will take you, a lot of times they're not the best jobs. So it makes a lot more sense for new grads right now, at least for the last 6 months. Things are starting to improve now, but to take a PRN or a Perm job, get some experience, and then travel when the market picks up.
I think some other reasons were that there was a lot of uncertainty with COVID for the medical reasons. So there's a lot of people that were feeling really unsure about working with active COVID patients. So they were thinking, well, maybe if I can come back home and just work a local job where I kind of know what to expect a little bit more rather than traveling away from home. That was a factor that led some people to not wanting to jump into a travel job in certain settings, like a skilled nursing facility. I also think the uncertainty with not knowing whether their contract was going to get canceled was a thing that led some people to want to stay local. And then I think just stability, if you're concerned that you might move across the country, and what if your job gets canceled and you have to come back, or what if you get exposed and you have to quarantine, maybe you'd rather be at home and risk that exposure there when you're near your support system. So I think there's a lot of reasons why we're not the only ones who took Perm or PRN jobs right now.
Yeah, it made the most sense for people that had limited experience in skilled nursing or home health, and for new grads, obviously, that don't have experience in either setting, to look for options outside of the travel market right now.
Yeah, so we get that, and we are huge proponents of travel therapy. We've loved it. It's been great for us, but we also understand and respect that there's a time and a place for everything. And this year, with all the uncertainty, for some people, travel just did not make sense. There were people who were persistent and were like, I'm going to travel no matter what. I'm along for the ride. This is great. I don't care. I'll make it work. And that's great too. And we've helped and supported and mentored a lot of people that were still persistent and were able to find travel jobs. But we just wanted to talk a little bit tonight about how we understand the other side of it. And we don't think there's anything wrong with that. And the next part I want to talk about are just some of the logistics and how even if you take a Perm or a PRN job right now, it doesn't mean it has to be forever. Before we get into that though, I see that a lot of you guys are tuning in live. Again, if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. If you wouldn't mind just giving this video a thumbs up, click the thumbs up or click the heart. We'd really appreciate it. And just say hey in the comments. We appreciate you guys watching. So talking about the logistics, if you decide that this is the right move for you right now.
Some of the new grads we talked to, they were scared that if they take a Perm or PRN job, they might just be stuck there. And so that was a very common concern that we got. They wanted to take travel contracts. They didn't want to get stuck in a Perm position. What we tell those people is that it doesn't have to be forever. And that's the way we look at everything, whether it's a travel job or a Perm job or a PRN job. You can make it as temporary as you want. With that being said, I would not recommend someone to sign on to a permanent job knowing that they're probably going to leave in 3 months, unless you go in with the understanding of the clinic manager that that's your intention and they're okay with it. PRN job is a little different, because if you take a PRN job and you're planning on traveling, then ideally you stay hired on and you just work there when you come back. So you're not really quitting, you're just taking fewer hours. But yeah, I think I understand that concern, but I do not think that you should be scared about getting stuck in a permanent or a PRN job because the travel market's not great right now.
Yeah, that's a really important thing to know, that Perm doesn't mean forever. And we've had this conversation with a lot of different therapists who actually, sometimes it'll happen where a travel therapist ends up signing on Perm with a job that they are at as a traveler. And we knew, we met up with one of our travel friends, Sarah, actually in Washington, and that was what her experience was. And I've heard this from lots of travelers, where they're at a travel job, and maybe the travel job asks them to extend a couple times. Things are going really well, you're enjoying the job, the employer likes you, they really want you to stay on full time, because that's probably why you're there. They need a full-time person, they can't find a full-time person. So any traveler who's ever been on a travel assignment like that knows they're like begging for you to stay. So this actually happens quite often, where you kind of have all the cards in your hand, because you're like, nah, like I still like to travel, I don't necessarily want to stay on full time, and they already know that going in. So then you actually have an opportunity there to be like, well, what if I just went Perm for the expectation that I might only be here 6 months or a year? And sometimes they're actually really willing to do that. They're like, you know what, that'll give us 6 to 12 months of not having to pay this premium to have a traveler here, and it'll give us 6 to 12 months of stability. So sometimes they're actually, if you're upfront about it, they're actually willing to do that, even knowing it's not forever.
And that can be a really awesome situation, because if you're in a position where you have travel job options and you can say, hey, I would consider staying if you make me a really good offer, that is the ideal bargaining chip right there. And I know a lot of travelers that have gotten extremely high paying permanent jobs because they basically just say, okay, you can pay me really well or I'll just leave. And every now and then a facility is willing to pay you a lot of money just to have the stability and have you stay there.
This goes back to a couple weeks ago when we did a video about negotiating. You have to know when you are in a good position, a position of power to negotiate, or if you're in a position where you're kind of desperate for the job. You have to just kind of understand that balance of power and where you sit. Where I would say that I maybe wouldn't be as upfront about that is if you're a new grad and you don't necessarily have as much bargaining power there. if you're applying for a permanent job and you're already, maybe not the top candidate for that permanent job just because you don't have the experience yet, you probably don't want to be quite as forthcoming and quite as pushy in that regard. You might just leave it, open, where it's like, yeah, I'm really excited to start my career. I really could see myself working with you guys. Don't make any commitments necessarily. I wouldn't, if you know that you maybe in 6 months to a year want to leave to do travel or do something different, don't sign one of those perm contracts where it's like you commit yourself for 2 years.
Yeah.
But if it's one where it's open-ended and you just don't really have to say exactly how long you plan to be there, just keep it open.
Yeah, and you never want to burn bridges, so just don't make any promises that you can't keep, or maybe not, it's a potential that you wouldn't be able to keep them. Because especially if you plan to go back to that area once you finish traveling, you never want to have a bad reputation of any sort with any of the clinics there, because that just limits your permanent options in the future.
Absolutely. And we get a lot of questions from new grads who maybe decide to take a perm job for now, but then want to travel. They say, what's an appropriate amount of time to stay with the company before giving notice? And there's really no hard and fast rule here. But I would guess roughly at least 6 months, if not hopefully 12 months. So that hopefully, you don't burn any bridges with this company. But as long as you give a respectful, professional notice and let them know, hopefully more than 2 weeks if possible, when it comes that time that you're ready to move on and try something different with your career, I feel like it's okay in that situation. Now, of course, you could always have a company that has ill feelings towards you, but ultimately you have to do the right thing for you. And I think that if you come at it in a professional way and a respectful way, then you're going to be okay. So that's a little bit about not making it your forever job. I think that's a lot easier, like Jared said, with a PRN job, because it's not as much commitment with a PRN job as a full-time job.
Yeah, the ideal situation is finding a PRN job that will give you as many hours as you want. Mm-hmm. And there are some like that. It just depends on, how the clinic is set up. But if you can get a PRN job where you're working 30 to 40 hours a week, that's perfect, because then when you leave, you can still stay with the company, just take less hours, and everything's great there.
So talk to me a little bit about finding jobs. So that's a big thing when people are like, how do you find these PRN jobs? So I told you already how we found the jobs. We mostly only had to go through the stage of talking to our connections and doing everything behind the scenes. But the next best option to that would be just go on Google, go on Indeed.com, search the listings for jobs in your area. And sometimes they actually advertise PRN.
For sure.
Because we actually did that too. I searched, and again, none of the outpatient clinics here had an advertisement for a PRN job, but some of the hospitals did.
Hospitals and also home health.
Mm-hmm. So if that had been something that we needed to look at, if the outpatient option wasn't working for us, we maybe would have considered applying for those PRN home health and hospital jobs, but we didn't have to go to that option. But that's definitely an option. And sometimes you can actually log in if you know there's a specific hospital or a specific clinic that you're interested in your area. Go to their actual website and look under the careers section, and sometimes they'll advertise it on their own website, but not really with Google or with Indeed. So definitely check both places for listings. In terms of if the job is not listed, this is some advice that I've given to a lot of people. Market yourself. I think this is a skill that a lot of people have forgotten about. I think in this texting internet era, we're like, well, if there's no job listed on the computer, how can I apply for a job?
Yeah.
But you guys can market yourself. So I would highly encourage it, especially in a job market like now when there's, a lot of uncertainty. They may or may not have gone out of their way to list a job and put it out there. But if you pick up the phone and call, they might be like, you know what, if we have a really strong candidate who's ready to come work, maybe we could hire on a PRN.
Yeah, and travelers can be very desirable people to have as PRN staff, because they know that you're probably used to hitting the ground running, getting used to documentation systems and new caseloads really quickly, and that won't take a ton of training. So in that situation, if you call or even stop by a clinic, especially an outpatient clinic, I think it's kind of perfect to do that. Drop off a resume and a cover letter, and just tell the front desk person there, I'm looking for a job in the area. If you could give this to the hiring manager, that kind of thing. I think that goes a long way instead of just applying for an online position.
Absolutely. Even if so that really helps. If you have experience and you know you have a strong resume, more than likely you're going to be able to get your foot in the door. If you're a new grad and you maybe don't have as much experience, I still think it makes you stand out as a candidate. If they see someone who's showing a lot of initiative to call them or stop by the office and ask, then maybe that might be the first thing that comes into their mind. Like with us, they didn't need help back in May, but then when I reached back out, they were like, you know what? Yeah, we really could use you. And it wasn't like they even had to go, that saved them a step. They didn't have to go out and search for candidates and pay money to advertise a job. Your name might be at the top of their list if you just take the initiative to call.
Yeah, I mean, initiative means a lot these days for hiring managers and things. If I was a hiring manager and someone went out of their way to come in and introduce themselves, that person would definitely be at the top of my list.
Absolutely. So I think that can really make you stand out. Whereas a lot of people will come to us and they'll say, can you get me in touch with a travel company? I'd like to talk to a recruiter who could maybe help me find a job in this city. And sometimes that works, especially when it's a really strong market. And there are certain recruiters that will go out of their way to cold call for you. Cold calling means that there might not be a job listed, but they just call and say, hey, are you looking for a therapist? We have a candidate that might be good for you. Sometimes recruiters will do that for you, especially some smaller companies, and that's a great option. But in a job market like right now, I think it makes a lot of sense, honestly, to cut out the middleman, because they might not really respond well to a recruiter calling and saying, hey, are you looking for somebody? Because they might be like, nah, we don't want to get into all that stuff. But if you call them directly and they know that they could negotiate with you directly, that might mean more. So obviously, if you want to go with the travel route, go through the recruiters. And if you want to even talk to some recruiters and see if they have any options in your area, that's a good first step. But if you're finding yourself week after week, month after month, not being able to find a travel job or not being able to find a local job via a recruiter, I would cut out the middleman and try to call directly and market yourself.
Yeah.
So those are some logistics of finding jobs and seeing if there is a PRN option or a full-time. Oh, the other thing I might mention would be, say there's a full-time job listed, but you maybe don't want to commit to a full-time, you could apply and maybe if you get an interview, say, would there be an option of doing PRN instead? So not a bad idea there to think about that.
Yeah, so now we're going to talk about some pros and cons of finding a PRN job, and because we got a lot of questions when we said that we were taking these PRN jobs. People were asking questions about benefits and things like that and how we're going to handle all that. So we want to go into some of the pros and cons.
Yeah, so in terms of cons, so some people were concerned about not being able to get enough hours, not being able to get benefits like health insurance, and then someone else was also talking about and this is a concern of ours too, if you've gone from being a traveler to taking a perm or PRN job, all of your pay is taxable. So your taxable wages are actually a lot higher, which means you might pay more in taxes than if you were a traveler. So we'll kind of address some of those. And then some of the pros would be that you make a higher hourly rate than if you're perm. So for some people, signing on to one or more PRN jobs and making this higher hourly rate across the board could actually be more lucrative. And you could really be, hustling and making more money than you would at a perm job. So higher hourly pay is one benefit.
That's especially the case if you're a single young individual that doesn't have a family that really needs the benefits. If you can work 50 hours a week between 3 or 4 PRN jobs, you can make more than you can make as a traveler pretty easily.
Mm-hmm. Another benefit, and a huge benefit for us, is the flexibility, because we still plan to travel for fun and for work once things settle down a little bit. So the flexibility of PRN, it works a lot better for our lifestyle right now than perm. So it just depends on what you need there. Less commitment kind of goes along with that flexibility. And also one perk that I think is that you get to try out different settings. And that's definitely a perk I would highlight for new grads who are watching this. I was talking to a new grad the other day, and I was saying how it could be a really good option to try a couple of PRN jobs to get, dip your toe in different settings without committing to a perm job. So talking about some of the negatives, benefits and insurance was one that came up.
Yeah, and that is a tough thing. This really depends on the situation that you're in as an individual. Do you have a family? Do you have kids? Are you 24 years old? You just graduated? It's a vast difference there. But yes, almost no PRN jobs are going to offer you benefits like health insurance, 401k, those kind of things. For most people, the primary concern there is health insurance. there are other options. So what we're doing right now is we're going through the Affordable Care Act through the healthcare marketplace, and we have a plan there. So we were not that concerned about health insurance. Our plan is pretty affordable, but depending on your situation, that might not be the case. Some of those plans are extremely expensive for like a family of 4 or 5. That could be over $1,000 a month or several $1,000s a month for some families. So that really depends. Things like vacation pay, sick days, all that stuff didn't really matter to us because we're making probably close to double what we would make at a permanent position. So working PRN and working a lot of hours, we have plenty of opportunity to save money and take time off when we want. So those kind of things aren't really a concern. I think for most people, they're worried about the health insurance, and it really depends. There's the ACA plans. There's some off-marketplace plans that you can look into that are through a third party that might be more affordable. There are the health sharing ministries that there's a ton of those now that might work for you. But there's several options if you don't get benefits through the actual company you're working with.
Yeah, and I think too, looking at your own situation, so this lifestyle of working PRN, depending on what stage of life you're in, could be different for different people. There are some people, like Jared said, if you're maybe just a new graduate, you could potentially still be on your parents' insurance. I think it's 26 is when you have to go off your parents' insurance.
Yep.
So somebody I think this could work really well for would be a brand new grad. And like I said, I just spoke to a new grad recently who is doing this. So signing up for 2 different PRN jobs to get experience in 2 different settings. And they weren't really worried about the insurance because they were still on their parents' insurance. So I think that was a really cool time in life to not have to worry about the benefits part of it and just be able to try out different settings, try it before you buy it, get to know the staff, get to know the clinic before really committing yourself to a permanent job. You could also be, depending on what stage of life you're in, sometimes we've talked to therapists who are later in their career and maybe they already have their insurance situation squared away. Maybe their spouse already has the insurance and they have a stable job, and so then as the healthcare professional, it works really well for them to just hop around to PRN jobs and make that high hourly rate because they already don't need the benefits because their spouse has it.
Yep.
So those are some different options there. But if you are somebody who's just a typical single person over the age of 26, not on somebody else's insurance, we found that the Affordable Care Act marketplace works well for us, but you'd have to just look at the rates for what type of coverage you need.
Yeah, it varies from state to state.
Yep. In terms of hours and consistency, so one question came up, how do you know if you're going to get enough hours? What if you sign on for this PRN job and they never call you to work?
Yeah, and I think a lot of you guys, experienced therapists, probably know that PRN is not a cookie cutter thing. It's like it highly depends on what the clinician wants to do and what the facility needs. The only other PRN job I've ever had, I was working 0 to 4 hours per week. They did not need that much help. It was more of they wanted some PRN therapists on staff in case they had a permanent person call in sick, or if they had a huge influx in caseload, but in reality, they really didn't need us. So I think over a 5 or 6 month period, I might have worked maybe 50 hours. So yeah, in that situation, it was very few hours. It would have been no way I could live off of that money. Whereas this job, Whitney's going to work 40 hours this week, PRN. So that is a very big difference. And in a situation like that first example where you might not get that many hours, that might be where you need multiple PRN jobs. And that's what a lot of people choose to do anyway, because then you can kind of pick and choose what you want. So if you can get signed on with, say, 3 or 4 companies PRN and they all reach out to you and tell you what hours they might need you, then you can just choose exactly what you want instead of being just at the mercy of one company and whatever hours they have for you.
Mm-hmm. So it's highly variable, and I think this is a conversation you need to have during your interview process. Ask them if there's an expectation of how many hours they typically would use their PRN. What's the caseload looking right now? Do you think you're going to need me every week? Do you think you're going to need me certain days? We have certainly met lots of people who basically work almost full-time hours, or they have like a pretty consistent schedule PRN, but we've definitely heard of some others where it's just like they might call me once a month or they might call me never. So you need to just get a feel for that during the interview and then line up what works the best for you. But hopefully, if you really, really need the hours, having 1 or 2 or 3 different PRN jobs could work well for you in that case. But it's just going to really vary depending on the setting and their certain needs. One thing I wanted to throw out too that we've been experiencing when we've been asking around about this is right now there's a lot of uncertainty with caseloads and staffing because of COVID, and sometimes they might actually need coverage if a therapist became ill or became exposed. So that's an opportunity sometimes to come and step in when they need help. If you don't know unless you ask, but if you were to call around and ask some of the facilities, they might be like, yeah, we kind of do need somebody on call more or less just in case that happens. So that's a unique situation for right now. And that's also a situation in which they might not be really advertising for a full-time therapist or PRN therapist per se, but if you went out on a limb and said, hey, I'm available, they might be like, yeah, we really could use you on staff just in case. So those are a couple of those concerns. Another one would be kind of how do you go about negotiating pay? And that was one that was new for us because Jared had one other PRN job and they kind of just said, this is the rate, and he just said, okay. But in this situation, we were going into it knowing that we might have more of an opportunity to negotiate for pay. So what we did is we asked around a little bit, and we also researched just kind of the averages in our area. So that would be an important thing for you to do, kind of have an expectation of what would be a normal pay going in. And then I think a good tactic would be to have them hopefully say the first number. They might say, how much are you expecting to make? And you could say something like, how much does this position normally pay? And then what I would do is aim high. So if they said, say you were a PT and they said 40, you could say, oh, well, I was hoping closer to 50. And then maybe you guys might settle on 45. And then maybe that was what you really wanted in the first place was 45. Or maybe you were like, that's way off base. I was hoping closer to 60. But just try to find somewhere, aim a little bit high, expecting that you're going to negotiate somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, and what we found is there's huge variation in PRN rates across the country. When doing some research on this, we had people tell us they made as low as $35 an hour PRN and some as high as $65 or $70 an hour PRN. So it is a massive difference. So you kind of need to know your market. You need to hopefully talk to someone that has already worked in that area, PRN, and see what they made, or at least close by, because you could really be selling yourself short if it's a market that normally pays 65 and you go in and say 45 is good. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, it really varies on setting and location, because I think it would be drastically different here where we live versus in like a really big city. And then we know that there's some places that are more saturated with therapists, and even if it might be a big city, they might pay lower because it's just super saturated. So yeah, try, if you know anyone in the area, try to get a feel for that. I also used as a resource some of the groups. So for physical therapy, I actually used the Doctor of Physical Therapy Students group, and I just used the search bar to see if anyone had ever asked about PRN rates before. Or there's some of the travel therapy groups too. You might could just search in the search bar and see if anyone has asked that before for your discipline and the setting, and just get a range of what people have said before. That was really helpful to me in getting a ballpark.
Nick Foy said he's given out COVID antibodies to everybody. So
thanks, Nick. Thanks for the offer. Okay, so that's a little bit about pay, insurance, consistency with hours. So just to kind of wrap up, we'll kind of go through, just sort of wrap up who we think this might be a good idea for and help you a little bit with your decision making. As we get towards the end of the video, if you guys have more questions, leave them in the comments, because we are going to go through the questions at the end. And again, if you wouldn't mind just giving this a thumbs up if you learned anything tonight or enjoyed it.
Yeah, even if you just have travel therapy related questions, we can go through those. We're not in any hurry, or if it's about PRN.
Yeah. So in terms of kind of who this would work well for, I sort of mentioned, I think right now with the way the travel therapy market is, if you are a new grad, our best recommendation is if you want to try travel therapy right now, it's definitely picking up some, so it's not out of the question. Feel free to reach out to us. If you're watching this video, you can just type recruiter recommendations in the comments, or you can go on our website and fill out the form at the top that says recruiter recommendations. We would be happy to help you get connected with travel therapy recruiters so you can at least try and explore that option. But what I would recommend is, while you are searching for travel therapy jobs right now, if you're a new grad, also be just kind of keeping an eye, Googling the PRN and Perm listings, and just keep that as an option.
Yeah, I would, the key there is to not have all of your eggs in the travel basket if you're a new grad right now.
Absolutely.
Have some other options.
Because the last thing we want is to see you just hold out hope that you're going to get a travel job for months and months and months, and then next thing you know, you've been licensed and available to work for 3 to 6 months and you've had no work experience. It would be way better after a couple weeks or months of searching for travel, if it just wasn't working out, to just go ahead and take a PRN or a Perm job and get that experience under your belt before, later on you could try travel after 6 months or so. So for you, if you're in that situation, it might not be a bad idea to try a PRN or a perm job just to start off with.
Yep.
Another situation in which this might be a good option for you is if you're a current travel therapist and you're experienced with this whole job search situation and you're not finding a lot of good options and you're just not willing to settle, and maybe you decide that for you right now you'd rather just take a perm or PRN job for a little bit until the market picks back up. And that's us right now. That's why we decided to do this, and we feel like it's not a bad time to do that. And then the other thing would be if you're early in your career, or even for some people late in their career, there are people who just work PRN all the time. We've met a lot of people who just hustled and worked 2 and 3 different PRN jobs, and they were able to piece together enough hours. And as long as they had their benefits and all that stuff figured out, they were able to make really good money by working a few different PRN jobs rather than having one permanent job. This also gives them a lot of flexibility in their schedule to be able to take time off, more so than if you just had a permanent salaried job. It gives you a lot of variety of experience, and it could lead to higher wages as long as you're able to get consistent hours.
Yeah. On the Fifth Wheel PT website, where I write a lot more about finance, I have a lot of PTs reach out with stories about their financial situation. And I've had, I would say over the last 4 years or so, at least 3 or 4 PTs reach out that made over $200,000 a year from doing various PRN jobs and working a ton of hours.
Especially PRN home health.
Yeah, usually it's home health, or sometimes skilled nursing will pay really well PRN. But some of these people had 4 or 5 PRN jobs and they were working 50 to 60 hours, but they were making so much money.
Yeah, so you just have to look at your goals and your current situation, but for some people that works really well and they're able to make it work. And then the other group of people would be maybe someone who's towards the end of their career. Maybe they're not quite ready to retire, but they have a good amount of savings and they just don't want to work full time anymore. Maybe they're not worried about the benefits because their spouse carries the benefits. And so that it works out well for them to only work part-time. I think also those that are thinking about starting families, switching to PRN is a great option. That's one thing that we love about physical therapy, and if you're watching OT or speech as well, that PRN is an option, because definitely when we have kids, we don't plan to work full-time. No. PRN will be the way to go.
We'll probably be doing 2 or 3 days a week each.
Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of flexibility, and hopefully it can work out well for you too. But that's a little bit about our experience. So far, so good. We've only been at our PRN jobs for a week, but we are liking it. We think it's going to work really well for this stage of our lives. We don't plan on stopping traveling. We definitely want to get back into traveling, hopefully in the new year. But for right now, this is a good choice for us.
Busy outpatient clinics. The caseload's been pretty cool, at least for mine. I'm working in a college town, so I have a ton of young students, which is a whole new population for me, and it's been a lot of fun.
It's been good. I think there's just a lot of perks for us right now, and I'm glad that we did this. All right, so we're going to go through the comments. Again, if you guys have any questions or any comments, feel free to leave them below, and we will read through them. Nick says, just send me to the rescue for caseloads. I'll just shoot my antibodies all over everyone. I'm not sure if that's the way it works, Nick, but thank you for the offer. Hey, Lindsay. Hey, Kelsey. Kelsey says, hey, guys, I made it on the live this time. Thank you for joining, Kelsey. We appreciate it. All right. Let's see who else had questions. Allie says, I actually got my PRN job through Glassdoor.
Yeah, and Glassdoor is a pretty good place to look at salaries as well. Usually they'll tell you what a general range is for your area. I don't know how accurate they are, but I know some people use that.
Yep, so that is a good resource for sure. Okay, Kimberly says, I'm listening to this during my cross-country drive. Thanks for tuning in, Kimberly, and be safe. I hope you enjoy your cross-country trip. Wonder if you're driving through Kansas. That's a long one. Okay, Nikki had said that was definitely one of my reasons for going kind of perm, I think is what she was talking about, because of COVID. That was back earlier when we were talking about just the uncertainty with COVID. Okay, Andrea says that a recruiter told me about the possibility for pairs that one person gets a travel contract and the other finds a PRN in the same area. How realistic is that?
Yeah, a lot of people do that. We've met several couples in the past where it's like a PT-PTA couple, and PTA travel jobs can be hard to come by. So basically the PT will just find a travel job, and then the PTA will put in their application all over the area and try to find something nearby for PRN. And it can definitely work that way.
Yeah, I definitely think it's realistic, and I think that given the current market, that is a really good strategy to use. It's very difficult right now to find 2 jobs together. Not impossible, but difficult. You have to look at all those factors: setting, location, pay, experience. So it's definitely a great option. And again, if you were doing that as a pair, I would utilize some of the strategies we talked about for the other person in the area. Of course, have the recruiters try to put out feelers to see if they can find anything for you. Check Glassdoor, check Indeed, check Google, check the local hospitals. And then if worst comes to worst, cold call, pick up the phone and say, hey, I'm going to be in the area for a while. Could you use some help? So utilize some of those strategies.
And also talk to the manager of the contract location, because sometimes they'll know of something or they'll be able to hire them on PRN at that same clinic, which is an ideal situation.
Yeah, that's definitely something we've looked into before and we've heard has worked out before. Maybe they didn't necessarily need 2 of the same discipline or whatever your other discipline might be, but because they are probably really happy to have the one traveler there and they want to keep you guys happy and keep you from like jumping ship and going somewhere else where you can find 2 jobs, they might say like, yeah, maybe we could use the second person PRN depending on your discipline. So definitely ask that. Nick was talking about which company he works with. He said he was even willing to do SNF, but he's back at home in outpatient. So I'm glad that worked out for you, Nick, because outpatient's definitely hard to come by right now. Matt says he's in the same boat. I'm not sure exactly what he was referring to there. There was a lot of commenting back and forth to one another earlier in the video, so we'll just scroll up.
Who's this?
Oh, Nick says, I never stopped working since the crisis, except he had 2 weeks off after getting coronavirus, and he was still paid, which was good because I think you were on a travel contract and they were doing that paid quarantine, so that's pretty cool. All right, let's see if we had any other questions or comments, and again, if you guys have anything, let us know. Armand says, hi, good to see you guys again. Thanks, Armand. He says, I was on contract until Wednesday. What happened? He says, then I transitioned to a permanent full-time at the facility that I was on contract at. Good for you, Armand, because Armand is a travel PTA, and I know that there was a little bit of difficulty with finding travel PTA jobs right now. So I honestly think that's a good choice right now, Armand, given the market. He says they were pushing pretty hard for me to sign on with them, and I figured I might as well jump on there rather than get replaced by someone else and get canceled, because there aren't many PTA jobs out there.
Yeah, I think that was a good time to do that.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the situation.
Who knows? Maybe next year you can go back to travel.
I hope so. Nikki says that she decided to stay home for a little while. She is currently looking for Perm or PRN jobs, not working at the moment, and so I'm waiting it out. Well, I hope that you can find something soon, Nikki. Andrea says, I'm a new grad. I'm taking boards in a week. Good luck, Andrea. I have profiles built with a couple of recruiters, so I'm keeping my fingers crossed on finding a job. If not, I will take PRN in the meantime.
Yep, that's the ideal situation. Have recruiters looking for you, but have a backup plan as well.
Yeah, and that's totally what we recommend right now. And I know we've talked to Andrea before, so if you are a new grad who's watching this, please reach out to us. We'd be happy to help you get set up with some of our recruiters. Or even if you're not a new grad, just let us know if you want recruiter recommendations. And then keep your options open, because it's really not the end of the world if you have to take PRN or Perm for a little while. Travel will hopefully be there and be better than ever in 2021. That's our hope. We really hope things are going to pick up and kind of go back to normal. I'm going to hop down and see if there are any more questions. Oh, we had a couple more people with questions here. Okay. Thank you guys for all your questions. Everybody's really active tonight, which is super cool. Okay. Hi, Kimberly. Melody says, I've been in a Perm job since June. Oh yeah, Melody also did the same thing where it was, she was in a location for travel. I've been in a Perm job since June, and I'm happy for the stability. I got it off LinkedIn. I'm lucky that it's paying fairly similar to some of the travel contracts that are out there. Really good, because I know she's in California. I am starting to look for contracts starting late December or January. I'm keeping my options open though, staying put if no travel contracts work out.
Yep, good idea.
That's great, Melody. Hope you're doing well. Kimberly said she is driving through Kansas because it takes forever. So eyes on the road, ears on us. And maybe some of you guys are listening later during your commute on our podcast, which I think is a much better format, our podcast, than Facebook Live. Rayon says, would you recommend starting a travel home health with no experience in this setting?
I would not. It's hard to get I wouldn't say that. I would say, you said you already have some experience in outpatient ortho. If you can talk to your recruiter and tell them that you need to start with a company that's willing to train you a little bit, I think it can work. There are some companies with home health contracts that are willing to give you like a 2-week period where it's kind of like a ramp up and you go out with another therapist just to get your feet wet and get a little more confident and comfortable. But I would not go into a busy home health contract where you're just expected to pick right up and go. So it can work, but you have to find the right contract.
Yeah, definitely try to get some training if possible. And there are some contracts that are willing to train. I think lately there haven't been as many that are willing to train, but it would depend on the area, especially if it was a more rural place and they're having some folks having difficulty getting people to come out for that contract. You could probably negotiate some training in there. I think it would be a good idea, but just make sure you have the right support and training. All right. Couple more questions here. Okay, Melody says, do you think that the election outcome could impact the economy and therefore the travel market?
I wouldn't think to any large extent. I think COVID is such a big factor that I think something like that is going to be such a small impact that it's probably negligible. It could impact the economy, but I just don't think it'll really affect. I think the bigger driver would be reimbursement rates and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
which could change, but it would be a slower moving process. It's
an interesting question, though. We'll definitely have to see what happens come election time, but we are just hoping that we've hit the bottom of what was the worst for the travel market
I think we have.
When everybody got laid off back in March. So we hope that it'll continue to increase from here. We're definitely hearing that from companies that they think it's hopefully going to stay the same towards the end of the year or get a little bit better. We'll just have to see, when January comes. Normally there's a little bit of a lull in the travel job market in January. It might be just a blip on the map this year, though. It might just be exactly the same in January. And we really, really hope it's going to start picking up, especially like as we get into February, March. Gosh, I can't believe it would be a year already since all this started, but time will tell.
Yep.
Yeah, so
thanks for tuning in, guys. If you guys have any questions after the video is over, or if you're watching this later, feel free to send us a message. We have tons of articles about almost everything travel therapy related on the website, Travel Therapy Mentor, so check that out. What else?
Yeah, that's it. We'll let you know. Maybe like if next week, if our PRN jobs crash and burn, we'll just get on here and say like, don't take a PRN job.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. But we'll keep you guys updated on kind of what's going on with us. But for now, we're planning on staying put. We'll be in Virginia for a little while. We really hope these PRN jobs are going to go well and work out good for us, especially in this stage of life. So if you're watching this and you're uncertain about what to do, just know that whatever you decide right now doesn't have to be forever. It doesn't have to be permanent. 2020 is a weird year. Do what works best for you right now, and then next year you could always try something different if that doesn't go well for you.
Yep. So we'll see you guys next week with another video. Until then, stay safe.
Have a great week, and thanks for joining.
Bye.